The second statue was not an enemy. She had no sword, no ambition, no poison in her hands. She had come to my door with bread and wild thyme, and she had stayed because she wanted to. Because something in her recognized, something in me that I had stopped recognizing in myself. I know the exact moment. I know the exact angle of light. I know what she had been saying, the last words still moving through her mouth. And I know the weight of what I did, not with my hands. Not with a weapon, but with the simple, catastrophic fact of my eyes finding hers. The first statue was a man who came to kill me. The second statue was someone I loved. I have never told anyone which one was harder to survive. There is a law at the center of my existence. It puts me. It was carved into the architecture of what I am long before I had any say in the matter. I did not choose this gift or this curse depending on the century, depending on who is writing the story. But that morning, in the half-dark, before the sun had fully committed to the day, a decision was made in a fraction of a second that no law could take back, that no prayer could reverse, that no grief, however long, however honest, couldn't. She had been afraid, not of me, of what they were going to do to her to get to me. And she had looked up. What follows is the memory I keep closest and share the least. This is the story of the second statue and what I gave up trying to save her. If this story pulled you in, like the video and follow Medusa's Memories. Tell us, what state are you listening from? There are places in the world that remember what they used to be. The temple had been built in a time when the distinction between sacred and dangerous was considered redundant, when people understood that the things most worth protecting were exactly the things most capable of harm. Stone corridors that had known 3 centuries of footsteps before I ever arrived. Columns that leaned slightly west, as though they had been listening for something just beyond the edge of the known world. The walls still held the memory of incense and old blood and the particular silence of a place where something real had once happened. I had not chosen it for beauty. I had chosen it for the acoustics. The way sound traveled through the corridors gave me 8 or 9 seconds of warning before anything arrived at the inner chamber. That kind of warning had saved my life more times than I could count. I had lived alone in the temple for what felt like a very long time. Though time, for me, moves differently than it does for people whose lives have edges. I was aware that I occupied a category of existence that did not have a clean name. Not goddess, not monster. Not exactly either, not entirely either. Existing in the space between those 2 designations where the air was thinner and the rules were less settled. What I had, in the centuries before Lyra, was solitude, not loneliness about the distinction, because they are not the same thing, and I had learned the difference the hard way. Loneliness is the absence of something you want. Solitude is the presence of yourself when there is no one else, and it can be its own kind of clarity, its own kind of company. I had organized my days around it. I had developed rituals. I knew where the light fell at each hour. I knew which stones held warmth longest after sunset. I knew the sound of rain on the eastern columns versus the sound of rain on the western ones, and they were different sounds. Distinctly different, in the way that similar things are always secretly distinct if you have enough time to pay attention. The first time I saw Lyra, she was stealing rosemary from the herb garden I kept on the south side of the temple. Not stealing as in taking with calculation. Stealing as in she had simply walked in, picked what she needed, and was already leaving before she processed that someone was watching her. She had the particular ease of someone accustomed to taking up space in places that weren't quite hers, not arrogance. Something different, more like an innate sense that the world was generally permeable and that most boundaries were suggestions. She was maybe 22. Darker than the local population, with a jaw that looked like it had been designed to hold opinions. She had herbs in one hand and a small clay pot in the other, and when she finally noticed me, standing in the shadow of the doorway, she did not run. She did not drop the rosemary. She said, "I'll bring back twice as much when mine grows in." That was the entire encounter. She left. I stood in the doorway for a long time afterward. She did bring back twice as much. 3 weeks later, early morning, left in a pile by the south entrance with a small piece of charcoal marked, slate that said, "For the rosemary." I did not invite her in. She did not ask to come in. This went on for 2 months, small exchanges at the threshold. Her never pushing past what was offered, me never offering more than the moment required. The law of the veil had existed for as long as I had. It was not my invention. It was not, technically, even for my benefit. It was for everyone else's. Anyone who wished to enter the territory I occupied. My gardens, the outer corridors, the perimeter of the temple walls, had to wear a covering over their eyes. Not blind as the veil to Shadowsound was, but it blurred the direct line of vision in a way that broke the specific geometry required for the transformation to occur. I had tested it. I had tested it in the only way available to me, which was through accidents and their varying consequences, and the veil worked reliably when worn correctly. Lyra wore it correctly from the first day she came inside. She had, apparently, asked someone in the village and the village had explained. She didn't comment on the veil. She didn't perform discomfort about it. She simply put it on at the threshold and took it off when she left, and the absence of drama around it was one of the things I found most remarkable about her. I should explain what it was like to be around someone who was not afraid of me. Most people who entered the temple, and there were some, occasionally, pilgrims or the desperate or the simply curious, carried their fear as a physical thing. I could feel it in the air before they rounded the corner. Fear has a particular texture, a particular heat, and it changes the quality of any room it enters. It makes people smaller and faster and unpredictable in the specific way that prey animals are unpredictable. And that unpredictability was itself a danger. Because unpredictable people reach for weapons suddenly and without warning, and I had learned to read fear as a precursor to violence. Lyra was not afraid of me. This was not the same as being reckless. I want to be careful here too, because there is a kind of person who performs fearlessness as a way of claiming superiority. Look how unbothered I am. Look how little you affect me. The performance of ease as a form of dominance. That was not what Lyra was doing. She was simply present, the way a person is present when they have decided that whatever might happen is worth being present for. She brought things, not offerings in the religious sense. The village people sometimes left offerings, which I found more discomforting than flattering. She brought things she thought I might find interesting or useful. A piece of blue glass that the light passed through in an unusual way. A map someone had discarded that showed a coastline no one recognized anymore. Seeds for plants she'd been told wouldn't grow in this climate, but she thought might grow in mine. She was right about 2 of them. She started staying longer. I did not tell her to go. That is the most honest thing I can say about how it began. I did not tell her to go, and she did not ask if she should stay. And so over the course of that first season, the hours between her arrival and her departure stretched without either of us naming what was happening. She talked. I listened, mostly. She had opinions about nearly everything, and most of them were not boring. She'd grown up somewhere else. She didn't speak much about where. And she had arrived in the village by a route that sounded circuitous, and I suspected had involved some difficulty she preferred not to elaborate on. She had skills. She could identify 32 herbs by smell alone. She could sew a wound closed with a steadiness that suggested practice, and she could navigate by stars well enough to find herself in unfamiliar territory. "Why did you stay?" I asked her once. She thought about it. "Because there wasn't anywhere else I needed to be," she said. "And here seemed worth staying for." I understood that answer. I also understood that it was only part of the answer. The second part of the answer came out over many weeks, slowly, in pieces. She had been in a different chapter of her life, attached to a household that had made use of her skills without acknowledging them. She had been useful in the way that very capable people are sometimes made useful by people who prefer not to notice their capability, given tasks. Never given credit, never given anything that might make her think she was the kind of person worth thinking about. She had left that household through a combination of circumstance and decision. She was still, I thought, in the process of learning what she was outside of being useful. I knew something about being defined by what you were capable of in ways that left no room for what you were otherwise. The serpents liked her. This surprised me because the serpents were not indiscriminate in their responses to people. They could feel threat in the air the way I could. It was a shared sensitivity, part of whatever the ancient geometry of my existence had built into us, and they reacted to threat with a kind of coiling stillness that made the person in question acutely aware that they should leave. With Lyra, they did the opposite. They extended toward her with a curiosity that looked almost like affection, and she, to her credit, had asked before she touched. And when I said she could, she reached out and let the nearest one wind loosely around her wrist like she had been doing this her entire life. "Do they hurt?" she asked, meaning their bite. "Not unless they want to," I said. She nodded. "That's fair," she said. I had not had a companion in longer than I could reliably calculate. I had had presences, people who lingered at the edge of my existence for various reasons, some benign, some not. I had not had someone who made the inside of the temple feel different when they were in it, who made the specific silence I had organized my life around feel, occasionally, insufficient. I am telling you this so you understand what was at stake. I am telling you this so you understand that when I say the morning the warriors came was the worst morning I have survived in centuries of mornings, you understand the actual weight of that sentence. They arrived before the light. For of them, armed in the way that people arm themselves when they are expecting resistance, methodically, without excess, which is actually more frightening than excess, because it suggests they have done this before and know what they actually need. I heard them before I saw them. The temple's acoustics did what they were supposed to do, and I was on my feet and aware before they had crossed the outer threshold. I knew the type. I had encountered the type more times than I wished to count across the long catalogue of my existence. Men who had been told that the contents of the temple were valuable in the abstract sense that powerful things are always valuable to people who deal in power. My existence was, to certain people in certain circles, a resource. The thing I could do was a weapon, and weapons are of interest to those who traffic in violence. I knew before they spoke what they wanted. Not me, exactly, but what I could be made to do. And the distinction between those two things had never mattered much to the people who came to collect me. What I had not anticipated was Lyra. She had stayed the night. This happened occasionally when she had been working. Late in the garden, and the road back was poor in the dark. She slept in the outer corridor, not the inner chamber. And when the men came through the eastern approach, she was already awake. Already between them and the inner corridor, before I had moved from where I was standing. I should have called to her to move aside. I should have told her to go flat, to press against the wall, to let me pass. I'd not. I was still in the inner chamber processing what I was hearing, and in those 2 or 3 seconds Lyra made a decision that I was not part of. She said, "You don't have anything I'm going to help you take." She said it the way she said everything, without performance. Without the kind of forced steadiness that is actually fear in disguise. She said it as a simple factual statement, which is both the bravest kind of courage and the kind most likely to escalate a situation. Because people who have come armed do not respond well to simple factual statements that do not acknowledge their arms. The lead man said something I will not repeat. He said it in the tone of someone who is telling you what is going to happen and wants to make sure you understand that you are not in a position to affect the outcome. Lyra said, "I'm not interested in what you think I am." I was already moving. I was moving the way I move when the specific math of a situation requires fast decisions. The serpent's awake. The old reflex is awake. Everything in me that had survived this long calibrating for whatever was about to happen. But the corridor was narrow, and the men had positioned themselves across it, and the angles were wrong and the light was wrong, and what happened in the space between one breath and the next. One of the men grabbed Lyra, not to harm her, not yet, but to use her as the specific kind of leverage that people use when they want to change the terms of a standoff. He pulled her backward and off balance, and she fought with the calm efficiency of someone who has learned to fight from necessity rather than training, which is a different, and in some ways more dangerous, kind of fighting. And in fighting she stumbled, and the veil that had been around her eyes, she had grabbed it when she heard them coming. She had actually grabbed it. She had been thinking of me even then. The veil shifted and fell. She looked up. I do not know if she was looking for me. I do not know if she was looking for anything. I think she was simply looking up in the way that people look up when they lose their footing and their body is trying to find the horizon. My eyes found hers for less than a second. Less than a second. There are laws in the world that do not negotiate. There are laws that do not care what you intended, that do not weigh your reasons, that do not factor in the love or the fear or the particular quality of the morning or the fact that you were moving toward her and not away. The law at the center of what I am is one of those laws. I felt it happen. I felt it the way you feel a word leave your mouth that you cannot call back, that specific, sick moment of irreversibility. The energy moved through the geometry between us, like something that had been waiting for exactly this angle. This distance, this specific convergence of conditions, it was not violent. It was not, in its execution, even dramatic. It was quiet. It was the quietest catastrophic thing I have ever experienced. Lyra did not fall. That was the first impossible thing. She did not fall, did not stiffen, did not become in that single second the gray rigid thing I had seen happen to others. She was still standing, still held by the man who had grabbed her. And she was still moving, her arm pulling back, her mouth opening, and I thought for one terrible blazing second that it hadn't happened. That something had broken the law, that the veil's partial presence had been enough. The man holding her felt something shift in his grip. He looked at his hands. Let her. Lyra took one step toward me. Her hand came up reaching, and I saw it in her fingertips. The gray that was not ash, and not cold, and not anything the living world should be. The gray that was mine. The gray made slowly, frips, moving slowly. She looked at her hand. She looked at me. She did not say, "I'm sorry." She did not say why. She said, in the voice she used when she was simply describing something true, "How long?" And I did not know. I had never seen it happen slowly. I had never seen it happen to someone the law loved. The men left. I don't think they were afraid. Exactly. I think they recalibrated. The specificity of what they'd witnessed, the veil falling, the moment of contact, the beginning of the grey moving across Lyra's hand, had changed the nature of what they were dealing with in ways that made their original plan complicated. They had come for a weapon. They had walked into something else. People who deal in force are often surprisingly practical about circumstances that exceed the terms of their original agreement, and this exceeded those terms considerably. They went back through the eastern corridor and I heard them outside, their voices lower, and then I did not hear them anymore. I was not thinking about them. I was thinking about Lyra's hand. She had sat down, not fallen, chosen to sit on the low stone bench that ran along the inner chamber wall. She had her left hand in her lap, the one that was changing. And she was looking at it with the same focused attention she gave to everything she studied. Not horror, not panic. Something that looked, God help me, like curiosity. As if her own hand had presented her with a problem she was genuinely interested in solving. "Tell me what you know," she said. This is what she did when she encountered something she didn't understand. She collected information first and felt things about the information second. I had watched her do this with the map of the unrecognized coastline, with the seeds that weren't supposed to grow here. With the first time I had told her the particular history of the temple in terms that made it clear. It was not an ordinary history, she gathered. Then she decided what to do with what she had gathered. "I've never seen it happen slowly," I told her. "In every other case, it has been immediate, complete. What causes the difference? I don't know." She was quiet for a moment. The grey had reached the lower part of her palm, moving like weather, like something that had its own internal logic and timeline and was not responding to anything either of us might want. "Is it painful?" I asked. I needed to ask. "Not yet," she said. "Different. It feels like prying the skin, like something is deciding what shape to hold." I sat down across from her. The serpents were very still. They were rarely this still. It was a different kind of stillness than the one they used for threat assessment. Something more like the quality of attention an animal gives to something it does not have a name for. "I have to try to find out if there is a reversal," I said. "Is there likely to be? I don't know. I have never wanted one before." This was true. The reversals I had heard of in the old stories were almost always partial or catastrophic, or required something. That made the reversal worse than the original condition. I had never consulted the old knowledge with any urgency, because urgency had never been the point. There had been no one I had wanted to reverse it for. Lyra looked at me then, carefully, the way she always looked at anything she was taking seriously, and the pain that crossed her face was not. I realized about her hand. It was for me. Even then, even with the grey climbing steadily toward her wrist, the pain on her face was for me. "Stop that," I said. "I'm not doing anything. You're making it about what I'm feeling." "I'm making it about both of us," she said. "Which is different." This was so completely her. This insistence on the mutual nature of everything. The refusal to let any situation be only about one person. That for a moment I couldn't speak. She had always done this. In arguments about whether I needed to eat more than I did. In conversations about whether I was allowing myself to receive the care she offered. In this. I started with what I knew. The old knowledge was not in books. Books came later. And the things I needed were older than the habit of writing things down. They were in the structure of the temple itself, in certain markings I had identified over the years, and never fully understood. In the particular quality of silence in the deepest chamber, which was not a storage room and not a shrine room, but something else. Something that the original builders had created for reasons they had apparently decided not to explain. I had spent a great deal of time in that room. I had never felt, until that morning, that it was trying to tell me something specific. I left Lyra with the serpents. She was calm with them and they were calm with her, and this was the best arrangement I could make. And I went to the deep chamber. The markings were a language I had been learning for years. The way you learn a language when you don't have a teacher, and the only text is architectural, through repetition, through context, through the places where patterns emerged, and the places where they deliberately broke. I had, over time, developed a reading of them that was partial and probably imperfect, but was what I had. I looked for the specific cluster of markings that I associated with origin, the beginning of the law that governed my eyes. I had found it once before, years ago, in a different kind of examination, and I had noted its location and moved on because it had not been relevant. It was relevant now. The cluster was in the northwest corner of the deep chamber, cut into stone that was visibly older than the surrounding stone, a different material. Harder, that the temple had apparently been built around, rather than simply having the marking carved into what was already there. Someone had considered this information foundational enough to preserve the original stone rather than transfer the knowledge to new material. I read it 3 times to be certain. There was a reversal. It existed. It was not partial, not catastrophic in the sense of requiring something grotesque. Not conditional in the way that most of the old reversals were conditional. Do this impossible thing, sacrifice this impossible thing, and maybe it was concrete. It was specific. It was achievable. The price was the complete and permanent removal of the transformation from my eyes. Not a reduction. Not a temporary suspension. The permanent end of the thing I had carried since, before I understood what I was carrying. The permanent end of the only protection I had ever had. The thing that had kept me alive through 3 centuries. Of people arriving with swords and ambition and their conviction that what I was could be used or ended. The permanent end of the only power I had ever known. If I paid that price, someone in the early process of transformation could be restored. I stood in the deep chamber for a long time. I want to be honest about what that time contained. I want to be honest because the version of this story that would be easier to tell is the one where the decision was simple. Love versus power. Love wins. No complication. But it was not simple. I will not pretend that it was simple. I had lived for centuries behind the protection of what my eyes could do. I had built my entire existence around it, the veil as the price of entrance, the reputation as the buffer between me and the constant human impulse to come take what I was and use it. I had watched people die trying to reach me, and I had felt, in those moments, not grief exactly, but something adjacent to it. The specific kind of sorrow that comes from understanding that the world keeps sending things at you, and the only reason you're still here is the thing they're trying to take. Remove that, and you are what? A woman with serpents for hair, in a world that has not historically been gentle with things it cannot categorize. Remove that, and the temple is just stone. Remove that, and the centuries of cultivated fear, the protection that fear had provided, evaporates. Remove that, and the next group of men who arrives with rope and ambition will not recalibrate and leave. They will succeed. I thought about all of this. I am telling you that I thought about all of this because I want you to understand that what happened next was not an impulse. It was a decision, weighed, considered, made from the fullness of what I knew and not from the panicked place of someone who doesn't understand the terms. I went back to Lyra. The gray had reached her elbow. She was still sitting on the bench. The serpents were still around her, closer now. Not touching, but surrounding her with their bodies in a formation I had never seen them choose before. She looked up when I came back, and her face did the thing it always did, reorganized itself into welcome. Even now, even with her arm changing to stone from the inside out, I found it, I said. Found what? The reversal. She looked at my face. She was good at reading my face. She'd had enough time to learn it, which is its own kind of intimacy, someone learning the grammar of your expression. Whatever she read there made her still. Tell me, she said. I told her. She was quiet for a long time after. Long enough for the gray to move another centimeter up her arm. She looked at the arm. She looked at me. No, she said. Lyra, I'm not going to let you do that. It's already decided. It hasn't been decided until you do it, she said. And her voice had the edge in it that came out when she felt strongly about something, not loud, not sharp, but with a density that made it clear the subject was not open for reinterpretation. I'm not worth that. Don't argue with me about whether I'm worth it. The question is whether I'm worth what you lose, and the answer is no. Nothing I am is worth what you lose. You don't get to make that calculation, I said. Neither do you, she said. That's exactly my point. You don't get to make that calculation for both of us, and then present it to me as already decided. I understood what she was doing. She was trying to protect me. She was trying to protect me from myself, from the specific way that people who love something will trade their own continuity for the chance to preserve what they love. She was doing this while her arm was turning to stone. She was doing this while the time in which reversal was possible was contracting with every minute we spent in this argument. I'm going to go do it, I said. Medusa. The way she said my name, not a command, not a plea, something in between. A name said by someone who knows you well enough to put the full weight of their knowledge into it. I've been happy here. Whatever happens, I have been happy here. That's not nothing. That's not a small thing. I know, I said. Then let it be enough. I looked at her, at the gray arm in her lap, and the dark eyes above it, and the set of her jaw that I recognized as her version of what she thought was finality. I looked at her for long enough that she would know I had seen her, the full version of her. The complicated, specific, irreplaceable version. And then I turned and walked toward the place where the old marking had told me to go. Don't, she said, behind me. I kept walking. The place I needed to reach was not in the temple. It was a day's walk, according to the marking's instructions, in a direction that involved crossing terrain that was not friendly to walking and included a passage through a ravine that the local people considered unlucky and therefore avoided. The marking had been specific about the place, a particular configuration of stones at the ravine's eastern end. A specific arrangement that had not happened accidentally and had apparently been placed there for exactly this kind of transaction. I walked through the day. I thought about Lyra while I walked. This is perhaps obvious, but I want to be specific about what I thought. I did not think about the grand arc of loss, about centuries of protection ending, about what I would become without the power that had defined me. I thought about specific things. The way she moved through the herb garden, purposeful and unhurried at once. The way she had said, for the rosemary with her arms full of rosemary, and the confidence of someone who intended to keep their word. The way she had asked, the serpent's permission before touching them. The particular sound of her voice, when she was working through a problem, the way her thinking was audible in the rhythm of her speech. I reached the ravine at dusk. The stones were where the marking had said they would be. I did not perform any ceremony. The old instructions did not require ceremony. They required presence, an intention, and the specific offer made to whatever principle governed the law I was trying to invoke. I made the offer. The something that responded was not a voice, and not a vision, and not a feeling exactly. It was more like recognition, the sense of something vast, becoming aware of a petition. The terms were confirmed as I understood them. I accepted. The moment of acceptance was nothing like what I had expected. I had expected pain, the removal of something that had been part of me for centuries ought to feel like removal, ought to feel like loss in the physical register. Instead, it felt like exhaling, like the specific release of a breath held very long. My eyes were the same eyes. My hands were the same hands. The serpents, when I checked them, were still the serpents. Nothing visible had changed. But something in the architecture of what I was had shifted. I could feel the absence the way you feel a load you've been carrying being set down. Not pain. Not relief exactly. Just the strange sensation of your body recalibrating to a condition it's been preparing for without your full knowledge. I turned back toward the temple. I walked through the night. When I arrived, the eastern approach was pale with the beginning of morning, the same time of day as everything had begun. I went through the corridor at a pace that I will not call running because running felt too much like hope, and hope at that point felt like something I needed to be careful with. I came into the outer chamber. Lyra was standing in the center of it. She was standing the way a statue stands. The gray had completed. The completion had happened while I was gone. This is the fact I have returned to across the years that followed. More times than I can count, the arithmetic of it. The specific, cruel geometry of the time that had been available and the time that had been used. If the walk had been shorter. If I had left earlier. If the ravine had been closer, or the stones easier to find in the failing light. If I had not spent those minutes in the inner chamber calculating what I was willing to lose. If, the mathematics of irreversibility, which has no useful end but which the mind returns to anyway, compulsively, the way the tongue returns to the place where a tooth was. She had kept standing. This is what I noticed first, that whatever had completed in her, she had kept the posture of her last living moment. Not fallen, not crumpled. Standing the way she stood when she was waiting for something she wasn't sure would come, slightly forward. Slight tilt to her chin, one hand lifted to her side, as though reaching for something or preparing to reach. She had been reaching. I think she had been reaching for the doorway, maybe, or for the sound of footsteps she had been listening for. She had been waiting for me, and the transformation had completed while she was in the posture of waiting. The serpents had arranged themselves around the base of the statue, not coiled, not protective in the aggressive sense, present. The way they were present around things that mattered to them. They did not move when I came in. They looked at me, and then they looked back at her, and the quality of their attention was the same. Quality I had felt in myself standing at the ravine, something beyond grief, something that did not have a clean name. I sat down on the stone floor, in front of the statue, for a very long time. I want to be accurate about this. I did not weep. I am telling you this not as a performance of stoicism, but because it's true and the truth matters here. I have wept over things in my long life, and what I felt in that chamber was not the thing that produces weeping. It was larger than that, and more still. It was the particular quality of understanding that cannot be undone, not the sharp edge of grief, but its wide, flat interior, the place, inside loss, where you finally understand that this is now the permanent topology of your world. She was stone. She was stone because I had looked at her. She was stone because she had been trying to protect me and had lost her footing at the exact wrong moment, and my eyes had found hers in the law that governed my existence, did not have an exception for people you loved, did not have a mercy clause, did not care what you intended or what you felt, or what the two of you had built over the previous year in the space between rosemary, offerings, and conversations that ended after midnight. I had given up the thing I was to try to save her, and I had been 12 hours too slow. I stayed in the chamber through the day. At some point the serpents came to me, moving from around the statue's base to wherever I was sitting, and wound around my ankles and my wrists, in a way that was not restraint, just contact. Just the particular weight of something alive being present with you in the way that living things sometimes are. Without language, without prescription, just the fact of continued presence. Toward evening, I began to think about what I needed to do next. This is something I had learned in the long life I had lived. Eventually, regardless of what has happened, there is a next thing. Not because time heals. I have never believed that time heals. I think that is a comfortable lie told to people in pain by people who want them to stop expressing it. But because continuation does not wait for readiness. The world keeps going and you go with it or you don't, and I had survived too long to stop surviving now. What I needed to decide was where. The temple was no longer safe in the way it had been safe. I was no longer what had made it safe. The men who had come and recalibrated and left, they would come back. They would come back because they had been sent by someone who dealt in the currency of power. And that someone had not sent them only once before. They would come back, and the next time there would be no geometry of consequence to make them reassess. There would be only stone corridors, and an herb garden and a woman whose protection was gone. I looked at the statue in the center of the chamber. I thought about what Lyra would tell me to do. This is a thing that happens after you lose someone you knew well. You know, with a particular and specific accuracy, what they would say to the various situations that arise after they are gone. The knowing doesn't comfort. I want to be clear about that. The knowing is its own kind of loss. Because the knowing is a form of their continued presence that cannot be shared, but it is information. Lyra would have told me, I knew, to be practical. She would have told me that staying in the temple out of a misplaced sense of vigil was not the same as honoring her memory, and that honoring her memory looked more like continuing to exist as the specific person she had cared about, which meant not letting myself be taken or ended by whatever came next. She would have also told me, I knew, that the statue was mine to keep. I had not expected to find that this was what I wanted. I had not thought, in the midst of the decision and the walk and the arrival, about what I would do with the stone Lyra if the reversal did not work. But sitting in the chamber with her still form across the room from me, I understood that the idea of leaving her there, of simply walking out and leaving her in a temple that anyone could enter now, was not something I was willing to do. I could carry her. She had not been large. The transformation preserved exact dimension. She was stone, but she was stone in the shape she had been, which meant she was stone the size of a young woman who kept her food in a small clay pot and stole rosemary and slept in outer corridors and had a jaw designed to hold opinions, heavy, but stone heavy in the specific way of her. And I was not without strength, even after everything. I spent the next 2 days in the temple preparing to leave. I took what mattered, the seeds she had been right about. The map of the unrecognized coastline, the piece of blue glass, the herbs I had dried. I packed them in what containers I had. I packed them with the care of someone who understands that objects become significant after their owners are gone. That the blue glass was just glass until it was the blue glass she had brought. And then it was the blue glass she had brought for as long as someone who remembered that was alive to remember it. On the third morning, I carried the statue out of the temple. The serpents came with me. I had not asked them to, and I had not instructed them. They simply came, moving alongside me the way they had moved alongside me for as long as I could remember. And their company on the road was the thing that made the road walkable. I did not know where I was going. This was a new experience. I had always had a destination, even in the centuries before the temple, even in the times that had been difficult. I had always had a vector, a direction, a toward. Walking without a toward was disorienting in a way I had not anticipated, and I stayed with the disorientation instead of fighting it, because fighting it seemed like the wrong use of whatever I had left. The village knew I was leaving. People appeared at the edges of their homes as I passed, not to stop me, not to help, to witness, which is its own kind of company. A few of the older women, the ones who had been most practical in their dealings with me over the years, the ones who had sent Lyra with herbs and information and occasional meals without being asked. They watched with the specific quality of attention that people give to the ends of things. One of them put her hand briefly to her chest when I passed, a gesture I recognized as meaning something like, "We see this. We see you." I nodded. I kept walking. I walked for 3 days before I found the place where I stopped. I did not choose it for any remarkable reason. It was a place where the land was elevated enough to see in all directions, and there was a spring that provided water. And the trees were old enough to have developed a quality of shade that was genuinely restful. It was a place where I could see anything coming. I set the statue down in a space between two of the largest trees. The serpents investigated the area thoroughly, as they did when a new location was being assessed. They returned with the particular body language that I had learned over centuries meant acceptable, no current threat, proceeding is an option. I stayed. I built, over the following weeks, the kind of shelter that is built by someone who does not know if they intend to be there long but wants to be comfortable in the meantime. Basic, practical, with a view of the statue from where I slept. Because I found that I could not sleep without that line of sight, not from grief, or not only from grief, but from something more fundamental. She was still present. She was stone, but she was still present, and the specific form of her presence, still reaching. Eschew waiting was something I was not yet ready to lose the thread of. The world had not heard about what had happened at the temple. News traveled in those years at the speed of people, which is to say, unevenly and with significant distortion. What reached the nearest populations was a version, heavily revised, involving some kind of departure, some kind of dramatic end to the arrangement of the past decade. No one knew about Lyra. No one knew about the reversal. No one knew what I had traded. Without the protection of my eyes, I was, this is the flattest way to say it, just unusual. A woman with living serpents for hair, in a world that had various precedents for unusual, is not automatically at risk. It is remarkable, it is notable. It is the kind of thing that people in the nearby village discuss extensively when they thought I was not paying attention. But it was not the same kind of risk that the eyes had represented. There is a specific terror attached to something that can destroy you by looking at you, and the absence of that terror changes every interaction you have. I discovered what I had been, in the eyes of others, only by experiencing what I was without it. For 3 centuries I had been danger. I had been the thing behind the veil, the thing that required the veil. I had been the power at the center of a careful set of rules. Now, I was a woman sitting at the edge of a road who had serpents instead of hair, and who was clearly not about to do anything to anyone. And the people who encountered me reorganized what they thought of me with a speed that was both interesting and, I found, unexpectedly painful. Not because I had wanted to be feared. I had never wanted to be feared. Fear is a terrible kind of company, and I had mourned, in various ways, the fact that it was the primary relationship the world had with me. But being feared had been, for centuries, my only reliable protection. And its absence felt, in those early weeks, like being suddenly exposed to weather I had forgotten existed. I learned to live in that exposure. I had no choice, and I had made the choice, which are not contradictory. I had made the choice that resulted in this having no alternative, which is a particular kind of freedom and a particular kind of constraint at once. The statue remained between the trees. I added to the shelter around her. Slowly, not from deliberate intention, but from the natural extension of any space that is lived in, a roof wider, a wall on the eastern side to block the wind that came at certain times of year, a cleared space in front of her so that she remained visible from inside. The serpents had developed a habit of gathering near her in the evenings, which I found I did not want to discourage. The place became, over time, what it became. People came eventually, not looking for the weapon I had once been, looking for something else. Word had traveled, in its distorted way, that there was a woman in the elevated place who had serpents and who had lost something and who was still there. People who have lost things tend to find each other. I did not advertise. I did not invite. But I did not turn away. What I offered was mostly silence and occasionally words. I did not have wisdom in any formal sense. I had years, more years than most of them could imagine, and I had the specific knowledge that comes from having survived the permanent loss of something you built your whole architecture around. This was, apparently, useful to people. I thought, often, about whether Lyra would have found this absurd, whether she would have said, with the particular directness she used for things she found ridiculous, that I was not a counselor of any kind and that people coming to me for comfort was a category error of some sort. I thought she probably would have said that. I also thought that she would have then, without making it into something, made tea for whoever had arrived and listened to them with the same quality of attention she gave to everything. I made tea. I listened. The serpents remained. The world, eventually, changed around the fact of me. This is always how it goes. Not the world accommodating itself deliberately, not any kind of recognition or recalibration of categories, but simply the slow accumulation of new habit over old certainty. The way stone is changed by water, not through any dramatic event, but through the patient insistence of contact. I had watched this happen before, across the long catalogue of the decades. I watched it happen again. What changed was what people expected when they arrived. In the early years, there was still the residue of the old reputation. People came half expecting the thing they'd been told I was. The danger behind the veil, the catastrophic gaze, and then they encountered me and had to reorganize. That reorganization took varying amounts of time and produced varying amounts of discomfort. Some people were disappointed. I found this interesting rather than offensive. They had come looking for a particular kind of power and had found a different kind entirely, and the different kind required more from them. Required them to be present and specific rather than simply cautious, and not everyone wanted that. The ones who stayed were the ones who could use what was actually on offer. I learned their names. Over the years, I learned a great many names. This was new. In the centuries behind the veil, names had been irrelevant because depth of individual relationship had been impossible. People had come and gone and been encountered at the level of their type rather than their particularity. Now I had particulars. The woman who came 3 years in a row, each time from further away, each time with a slightly different version of the same problem she had not yet resolved. The older man who arrived once and said nothing for the first 2 visits, and then, on the 3rd, told me something he had never told anyone. The children who came because children in the village had been told. I was interesting rather than terrible and had decided to see for themselves and had, over time, developed an ease with the serpents that was specific to people who haven't yet learned to fear things on principle. The serpents remembered them. This surprised me, or it would have surprised the version of me from before Lyra. I had not previously known that the serpents retained individual recognition across significant time intervals, but they did. They knew who had been kind to them and who had been tentative, and who had ignored them and who had spoken to them the way Lyra had, as though being spoken to mattered. They remembered. I had not expected to find this consoling, but I did. There was a woman who came in the 2nd year of my time in the clearing. She had walked from considerable distance, which I knew because her feet showed the particular damage of long travel and her provisions were finished. She did not tell me why she had come. She sat at the edge of the clearing for most of a day without speaking, and I gave her water and did not ask her to leave. The serpents regarded her with the quality of attention they gave to things that were carrying significant weight. Toward evening, she said, I did something I cannot undo. I recognized this. I recognized it with the specific recognition of someone who has the same language in their body. Then you know, I said. I know. We sat in the way that people sit when the thing they are carrying is too large for words to move, and silence is the only container large enough to hold it. I did not offer resolution. I did not offer comfort of the kind that requires misrepresenting what has actually happened. I offered the company of someone who understood the specific architecture of an irreversible thing. She stayed for a week. When she left, she did not thank me in the conventional way. She simply looked at the statue between the trees for a long moment before she turned to go. And I understood that she had recognized something in the statue that answered a question she had not known how to ask. This happened in various forms, many times. I kept the statue. It requires some explanation, I think. The choice to keep the statue there, between the trees, at the center of the clearing I had built the shelter around. People noticed it. People asked about it. Not often. Most of them had the instinct not to ask about the things that were clearly sacred in the specific way that loss makes things sacred. But occasionally, someone would ask, and I would say it was someone I had known and loved and lost, and they would nod and leave it at that. The nodding was its own kind of recognition. Most people who had lived long enough had a statue somewhere, metaphorically something they kept at the center of their space, because they could not imagine the space without it. The ones who asked more than that, who asked what had happened, I did not tell the whole story. I told versions. I told the parts that were useful for the person asking. This is also something I learned in those years, that a story is not a fixed object. That the same story can be told in many ways and still be the same story underneath. And the question of which version to tell is really a question about what the person in front of you needs to be able to carry. What I never changed, in any version, was the ending. The ending was always the same. I had given up the thing I was to save her and arrived too late. That was the true ending. The rest What I became after, what the place became, what the serpents remembered, what people found when they arrived. That was all aftermath, important aftermath. Aftermath that I had built deliberately, day by day, from the material of what remained. But aftermath. I want to tell you what I found in the aftermath. Not peace. I am not interested in telling you I found peace. Because peace has become a lie people tell to neaten up endings that don't actually neaten. And this ending does not neaten. What I found was something more uncomfortable and more real. I found that I was still here. Not in the triumphant sense, not in the sense of a self that had survived and remained intact, and was now wiser. I was here in the stubborn, unspectacular sense, continuous, persistent, not because I had decided to be, but because continuation is the default condition of a long life, and the alternative requires a decision I had not made. I found that the things Lyra had brought to the temple, the specific quality of attention, the habit of treating things as worth investigating, the instinct to make room for others without losing the room she had made for herself. I found that these things had transferred into me in the way that living in close proximity to someone always transfers things. Quietly, over time, without ceremony. I did not know, until she was gone, how much of the way I moved through space had been shaped by watching her move through space. How much of the way I listened had changed because she had listened in front of me every day for a year. The map of the unrecognized coastline was on the wall of the shelter I built. I had looked at it many times in the months before she came, and it had been simply a map, an interesting object, a puzzle, a record of somewhere that might have existed. After she was gone, the map became different. It became an object that she had touched and carried and noticed and thought worth sharing. The distinction between those two versions of the same object is one of the truest things I know about loss. Things do not become less. They become more, specifically more, in the shape of whoever is no longer there to see them. I did not throw away the clay pot she had brought Rosemary in. It sat on the shelf beside the blue glass. On mornings when the quality of the light was similar to the morning she had first brought it, before any of the rest. Before the invasion and the veil and the catastrophic geometry of two people looking at each other. I would see the pot and have, for exactly 1 second, the specific and devastatingly ordinary feeling of someone at home. The feeling of a day containing more than it contained before. I have learned to receive that second. I used to resist it in the early period, because receiving it felt like being wrong about the situation, like allowing myself a softness the situation had not earned. But grief, I have come to understand, does not require that you remain correctly calibrated to its worst version at all times. The pot is the pot. The second is the second. You are allowed to receive both. Loss, I had learned across the centuries, does not take back what it gave. This is perhaps the only comfort I have to offer that I actually believe. And so I am offering it plainly. What is given in love does not go back when the person goes. It stays in you. Changed specifically by the shape of the absence, but present. The rosemary grew in the new place. The seeds she had been right about continued to come back every spring. The blue glass was on the shelf above where I slept, and the light still moved through it in the unusual way she had noticed and brought it to show me. She had been happy here. She had told me that. I had been there when she said it, and I had not had the presence of mind to tell her. In that moment, I had not had the presence of mind for anything except the decision I was already moving toward, that I had been happy too. That I had been happy, specifically, because of her. That the year she had spent in the temple had been a year unlike any I had experienced in 3 centuries. Not because it was dramatic or extraordinary by any external measure, but because it had contained a quality of ordinary dailiness that I had not previously known I was missing. The ordinary dailiness of a person who was glad to be there, who arrived with their arms full of what they'd just found and said for the rosemary, as though making good on a promise to a friend was the most natural thing in the world, who wore the veil without commentary and took it off at the threshold and turned back once. For the past curved out of sight, lifted a hand, I with who. I had not said it. This is what I carry alongside the statue. Not guilt. I want to be specific about that too. Because guilt and grief are often conflated, and they are different things with different weights and different effects. Not guilt. What I carry is the simple, unanswerable fact of the unsaid thing. The thing that would have cost me nothing and meant everything, and that I did not say, because I did not yet understand that the particular architecture of that moment was not going to come back around. It doesn't come back around. Say the thing. Not because it guarantees anything. Not because saying it prevents loss or removes the fundamental contingency of everything. But because the not saying is a weight you will carry in a way that the saying never could be. Because the window is open and then it is not open, and the question of whether you use the window is one you will live with for a very long time. Possibly all the time you have. I speak from considerable experience. Say the thing. Say it plainly. Say it without needing the circumstances to be perfect, or the moment to be earned, or the vulnerability to be earned. Say it because the alternative is to stand in front of a statue you made from someone who loved you and spend the rest of your considerable life saying it to stone. This is what the statue has taught me, if it has taught me anything at all. She stands between the 2 oldest trees. She has stood there through weather that has smoothed her slightly, through the growth of the trees on either side, through the various seasons of the place I built around her. The reaching quality of her posture, the slight extension of her hand, has not changed. The grey of her has acquired, over the years, a kind of patina from the rain and the shade that makes her look, at certain times of day and in certain qualities of light, almost warm. Almost like the version of her that I knew was still there, inside the stone, arrested in the moment of reaching. The serpents go to her in the evenings. I let them. On certain mornings, when the light comes through the trees at a specific angle and the serpents have coiled into stillness, and the only sound is the spring and the slow weight of old trees settling, I sit in front of the statue and I say the thing I did not say, not because she can hear it, because I still can. The first statue was an enemy. The second statue was someone I loved. I have stood in front of both in my long life, and I will tell you that they do not feel the same. They are not the same. The weight of what we make unintentionally, of what we do to the people who chose us, who stayed when they did not have to, who reached for us, even when the reaching was the last thing they did. That weight is its own architecture. You build around it. You build with it. You do not carry it away. This is the memory I keep closest. This is the story of the second statue, and what I have made, in the years since, from the materials of what she left behind. If this story reached your heart, leave us a like and share it. What would you have done? And don't miss what comes next. Another memory Medusa never forgot.